Thank you very much for the floor, and I would kindly invite my dear colleagues from the body of European regulators for electronic communication, and at the same time our honorable guests during this conference. First, Cristina, Director of Spectrum from Ofcom UK, Professor Konstantinos Massalos, President of the Hellenic Telecommunication Authority from Greece, João Cadete Matos, Chairman of the ANACOM, the Portugal regulator, Vladimír Kešjar, the Chairman of the Regulatory Authority for Electronic Communication and Postal Services from Slovak Republic, and Jaromír Novák, Chairman of the Council of the Czech Telecommunication Office. Jaromír. So we are during the second session, and our core business for today is spectrum management and the area of potential developments. Gentlemen, if you don't mind, I will start with Cristina. On the backstage, I promise that we will not go through the Brexit case. However, all of us used roaming whilst traveling to UK, so I'm still keeping my finger crossed for your government, especially for the Prime Minister. I hope that Mrs. May will do her best to avoid the distraction that is coming. But coming back to the 5G issue, my intention is to start with the Ofcom experience on that, as needless to say that your authority is one of the most developmental, and many of my colleagues from Polish industry, they keeping their eyes on your website because your materials, documents are really good for knowledge sharing and your, let's say, experience on the spectrum issues, as you've got 4 MNOs, if I'm correct. It's quite crucial to understand the real competition, and the first issue is about the challenges in front of, let's say, the 5G rollout, especially challenges to industry verticals in launching 5G, and what you and the government, if I may say this way, that's together you are doing so as to support their goals and address the entrepreneurs' expectations correctly just before the 5G rollout in UK.
Thank you very much, Marcin, and thanks everyone. It's a pleasure being here today, and it was quite interesting to be witness to the conversation this morning about digital transformation. Clearly, the discussion of this morning were all about how can we enable the digital transformation, and let's not forget that wireless connectivity will become even more critical. And I'm saying wireless connectivity and not 5G, despite today being all about 5G, because in parallel with 5G, there will be 4G evolution and other type of solution, IoT bespoke solution that could be critical for verticals. In the UK, we have started the 5G or evolution of wireless connectivity, let's say at the beginning of last year, after the RSPG identified the key bands for 5G. And we immediately realized that this was, of course, the technology, the G, but is going to go beyond the enhanced mobile broadband. I think there was a discussion, you yourself said, what's going to be first? Well, enhanced mobile broadband is going to be first, but verticals will come. And our experience in the UK, from a government perspective, has been, let's try and stimulate that demand, and funds have been made available for what we call test bed and trials across different industry sectors. So we've got one on the health, one on the automotive, one on manufacturing itself in the north of England, just to see how these use cases could materialize. From a spectrum perspective, what we've also identified is that we don't want, and this is kind of our strategic objective, we don't want to be an inhibitor to all of this innovation that will be brought by 5G and other technology innovation. And we don't want spectrum to be this inhibitor. So we have looked a little bit at all of the different bands. Clearly, MNOs will need spectrum bands, and C-band we've been discussing is quite critical, but we've also looked at opportunities, and we're consulting right now to actually open up additional additional bands for verticals, for industrial uses of many types. Here we're talking a lot about manufacturing, but we're also in the UK, and I'm sure Poland might be the same. There's a lot of rural and agricultural kind of industry. So we're looking as well at the agri-tech sector and how we can make spectrum available for them. So we've looked at other bands, but also a proposal that is up, and we're consulting right now, is actually to open up access to mobile bands when they are not used by mobile. And it's something we wanted to do for quite some time, to sort of see is there an ecosystem on which new application needs to rely, and if they are in an area where a mobile operator is unlikely to deploy, why not try and give the opportunities to other players to deploy? So this is what we're doing right now. In terms of challenges for us, it was clearly the fact that whilst the MNOs and big companies, the like of Siemens, Cisco and others, might have the regulatory power to engage with a regulator, the SMEs that have been discussed quite extensively this morning, and the UK has got a similar SME force, don't have the regulatory teams that could actually engage with the operator. So right now we're really going out to get them. We're talking to the Federation of Small Businesses, the Chamber of Commerce for business in the UK, just so that we can reach them out and we can make them part of the debate, because it's difficult for us then to meet all of the demand if we don't know what is the demand out there.
Can I just come in here? Do they declare any other obstacles in 5G rollout than frequencies? I mean, some other issues that you need to face in your future to, let's say, make it for them more smoothly? I mean, especially SMEs.
We're at the beginning of a discussion with SMEs. I think for them it's a matter of fees as well. So we are making available some spectrum. We are proposing on making available some spectrum at 38242, just above, and there we're trying to set fees that will be affordable for players, because clearly not everyone has got it's an MNO that will be interested in investing on a national license. So we're trying to develop localized to meet that type of demand. So if you want spectrum in a factory, you don't want spectrum in that region. So how can we make it available in a way that only meet the requirement of that factory, and the factory around the corner can reuse that spectrum for some other purposes? So this is one of the challenges that we're seeing and we're trying to address by consulting on localized licenses at the moment.
So extremely hard work. Case by case.
It's well, we've been doing a lot of coexistence analysis, I can tell you, to try and understand how big an area can be, and also to define. At the moment we are out with solutions for urban indoor low power and rural outdoor high power, and I can tell you that to define rural is not as easy as it seems.
Okay, you've mentioned about the C-band, and that's quite obvious that this bandwidth is, it seems to be crucial not only for operators, but especially for vendors to develop 5G. I got one question to Kostas, because when I was last time in Athens, it was last summer holidays, and after, let's say, 1 hour of workshop, it turned out that we've got many similarities in terms of frequencies, especially in terms of the mess that both of us inherited from the previous times. Of course, Poland and Greece got completely different history, but in terms of frequencies, we've got quite similar situation in terms of 700 megahertz C-band and 26, especially when we take into consideration how many existing entrepreneurs we've got. And I was surprised with these similarities. My intention is to find out a little bit more about how you are going to solve these problems, because on the one hand, you need to fulfill the entrepreneurs' expectations, some kind of schedule imposed by European Commission. On the other hand, you need to make it far more clean just before distribution. So what is the most important issue that you are facing with now?
Thank you, Marcin, and I'm really grateful to be here today in this great event, and would like to congratulate the organizers for this excellent event. Indeed, we are currently looking and focusing on the 3 pioneer bands for 5G, 700 megahertz, 3.6 gigahertz, and 26 gigahertz. And we are also looking at the 1.5 gigahertz band. What we see is that in all these spectrum bands, we have already some users already using them, and we have issued license in the recent past. So what we face is actually an optimization problem, meaning what we can do to generate as much as possible large contiguous block of spectrum in all these bands, because this is what 5G really requires. If we see the 3.6 gigahertz spectrum band first, we have two paired assignments, licenses in public rural networks, 2 by 30 megahertz each, and these are for fixed wireless access.
For precise understanding, 30 megahertz for each operator? Or?
2 by 30, 2 times.
Okay.
So to two different special vehicle companies implementing public rural networks. And these are for fixed wireless access in specific areas of Greece.
Is it enough from the operator's point of view? Have you asked them about that?
Well, this spectrum has not been used extensively in the context of this rural project, because the demand in these areas, there are rural areas in Greece, not densely populated, is not big enough. And this might make our life easier in the near future. Well, because what we want to do at this stage, we have 280 megahertz of free spectrum, but this is fragmented. So what we would like to do is either to evaluate opportunities for refarming these paired licenses, or at least try to defragment the band by moving the 2 by 30 megahertz, the two licenses of 2 by 30 megahertz in the borders of the band, or at least create contiguous blocks of spectrum. This is something we currently examine, and we are negotiating with these special vehicle companies running the rural project. Ideally, we would like to have contiguous blocks of 80 megahertz spectrum, or ideally 100 megahertz spectrum in this band. And on top of that, we need to evaluate synchronization issues between adjacent blocks of spectrums that will be awarded to different operators, so that we achieve the best interworking of different networks without introducing guard bands, for example, so that we exploit spectrum better. So this is the situation for 3.6. In 700 megahertz, we have digital terrestrial television, 2 licenses, 1 public, 1 private. So what we will do, and we currently work on in collaboration with our government, is to change the national frequency allocation table, so we harmonize the 700 megahertz band for mobile operators, and then we will have to change the frequency map for digital terrestrial television. And as soon as we do this, we will have more work to do to change the license rights of the 2 digital terrestrial television operators before auctioning this part of spectrum, the 700 megahertz. So we expect this to be ready to be auctioned end of 2020. In the 26 gigahertz band, again, we had a recent exclusive assignment of licenses to our mobile operators, more specifically 4 by 112 megahertz spectrum to the 3 of them. And this is again for point-to-multipoint or point-to-point fixed wireless access. So this creates fragmentation on the lower 2 gigahertz part of the band. So we evaluate different options. So for example, to license the part of the spectrum that is not fragmented, or try to free also the lower part of the band that is fragmented before proceeding with auctions. Again, it's a matter of negotiation with the operators. Well, also in the 1 gigahertz band, we have 2 by 28 megahertz license already assigned. And in this case, we see that our mobile operators are interested in this band. We ran 2 consultations, one finished very recently, but they would like to exploit this band after 2020. So we need to do the same exercise in this one as well. So we have to solve, as I said, a complex optimization problem. We need to meet the deadlines set by European Commission, but we have to solve all these fragmentation issues and current use issues. In the meantime, for 2019, we ran 5G trials, so we came up with what we believe a flexible framework for trials in end of 2018. So we awarded trial licenses with 1 year duration to cover municipality areas, not specific sites, and the cost is almost zero. So we try to give incentives to operators to run several trials, 5G trials, as during the time we try to find issues and solutions for the defragmentation issue.
Kostas, you've mentioned, if I understood you correctly, that you are thinking about the refarming so as to guarantee an appropriate capacity for the operators, especially in C-band. Sorry for my ignorance, but are you privileged to do that on your own, or in terms of, let's say, Greek Telco Act, or you need to, let's say, wait or kindly ask operators for their request to do that?
Okay. In some cases, we have the mandate to do this in 3.6 gigahertz because part of this spectrum has been awarded through an auction in 2014 according to EC harmonization decision 287. So we can do this. But in another case, spectrum has been awarded to a special purpose company in an administrative way through our government. And there we indeed have issues. It's not going to be easy. We only can negotiate with them, but we don't have the authority or the privilege to move them. And it's going to be tough, I think.
Okay. Thank you very much. João, we had many opportunities to go through, let's say, our approach regarding the 5G rollout, even in BEREC. But you are one of those regulators who, let's say, came to our industry, came to our BEREC family from, let's say, quite different branch of economy. And I think that you are strictly focused on, let's say, commercial business cases for the 5G rollout. My question is, what kind of products and what kind of, let's say, value added is behind the 5G rollout in nearest future for Portugal, and how you expect to develop 5G so as to fulfill not only entrepreneurs but also end users' expectations?
Thank you very much. I'd like also to congratulate the organizers for this excellent conference. It's a pleasure to be here. I think that all in this room could agree that we have a big challenge with this transformation to the 5G. Because it's not only a new generation, it's a lot of opportunities for the digital transformation that is taking place. Looking back, perhaps it will be a so big challenge as it was 5 centuries ago, the discoveries for the Portuguese. Indeed, we would like to be relatively modest concerning what is feasible this year, the next year. We believe that our first obligation is to create conditions for the operators to start developing pilots. And so we are facilitating and cooperating, creating these conditions. These conditions are relevant also for the research on the uses of 5G, so we are helping the different initiatives that are taking place in my country. We also consider important, do not forget that 5G in a first step will be a way to complement 3G and 4G concerning the broadband networks, the mobile broadband networks. Indeed, in Portugal, we have still several areas without a good mobile coverage. So these, we have to see 5G as an opportunity to increase and to facilitate the coverage. And this put ahead of us different challenge. How this is made possible, considering the relevant investments that will be required. For the moment, our main activity concerning the 5G roadmap is the liberation of the 700 megahertz band. In the case of Portugal, I suppose this situation is similar to other countries. This band was used until now for the digital terrestrial television, and so we are planning the move from this band to another.
Is it ready for distribution now?
It is.
Is it ready for distribution now?
We are planning to do that starting the end of this year, and in order to be completely liberated June next year. So we have a lot of work to be done during this year and the first half of the next one. So in the beginning, as I mentioned, the target, the goal is to improve the mobile broadband network to complement 3G and 4G. This is also the expectation from the operators. This is what they want. Of course, other requests, namely from the industry, will perhaps accelerate this process, but we have to wait and see and to be prepared to facilitate this transformation, because the obligation from one regulator in any of the European countries is to facilitate this change and to avoid, to create some obstacles to this change. Of course, in the future, we would like to see other options taking place, namely the massive machine type communication and also the ultra reliable low latency communications, but this will be not in the first step, we believe.
Okay. We will come back to these retail services a little bit later, but I've got one question to Vladimír. If I'm not mistaken, it was last year when we met during the BEREC stakeholder meetings, and you asked me first time about the situation in Poland regarding the migration of multiplexes to the lower bandwidth, I mean from 700 megahertz. And you told me that in Slovakia there is extremely fierce battle between the operators and the government regarding who will pay for that and who will, let's say, co-found this kind of migration to the lower bandwidth. I answered you that in Polish it's not the case now. But after, let's say, 1 year and ongoing proceedings regarding the amendments to Polish Telco Act, I must say that by now it's one of the most crucial cases for me as a regulator. So the reality is changing really, really rapidly. My question is, did you solve this case, and do you have any, let's say, advice for me how to do that smoothly?
Thank you, Marcin. Dzień dobry. I'm happy to be invited to this conference. It's very nice. And I think after Barcelona is just continuing this trend in telecom industry, but coming to 700, it will be very nice and easy for me to tell Marcin, yes, we solved it. Because
ready and waiting to find out how to do that.
Don't worry, because we start with issuing and swapping frequencies. The first step has been done already. But you know, there is always a small devil behind all these stories. So our small devil is that this frequency has been awarded to TowerCom, which is the broadcaster using 4 multiplexes, and they got a license till 2029. You hear right, 29. So there is no chance to do anything, just to take it from them, make different swapping, which is like maybe issuing 42 different permissions and all these stories around.
Sorry for interruption. Would you like to say that you will not fulfill the European Commission recommendation?
No, of course, this is a target to fulfill because we agreed with the other neighboring country end of 2017, like it was a duty for everyone. So we have all this agreement. If we will not follow, then will be a problem with Austria, Poland, Czech Republic, so Hungary. So we have to follow, yeah. So, but the problem is that we have no compensation in our legislation. It means you took it from someone who got it till 2029, tell him thank you, and give it to somebody else, you know. So 2014, I ran to Brussels when they announced this changing in frequency harmonization, and I was asking if the Brussels is going to pay, because the idea came from Brussels. Yeah, but I got answer that not. So we have to think how to do it by us. And ministry who is in charge for legislation is now in procedure to get some kind of compensation for this case. So it means that now we are in parliament with this legislation, but apart of it, we as our office has to start with all these steps what we need to do, because otherwise we will not manage to be ready in 2020, mid of 2020.
Is this operator interested in being granted with, let's say in inverted commas, appropriate amount of money for such kind of reshuffling?
No, we are, yes, we are going to reshuffle to another possibilities, another multiplexes. We have to prepare, everything is done already to be prepared for them. But of course, the cost what they will invest, because they have like 170 sites what should be changed and all this duty around. So we expect that they will ask for some remuneration for this technical issue to be swapped to these places. But everything should be done 2020. Yeah. We prepare also end of this year a tender for mobile operators to participate on the auction, to get this frequency for them, because this is a duty. And I don't know how keen they are to come, because sometimes it's not good if you are the first coming back to 3.5 and 3.7. Slovakia was one of the first country in Europe. We sold it 3 years ago. And unluckily, this time, two biggest operator, which is Orange and Slovak Telecom, daughter company of Deutsche Telekom, they never appear for the tender. So now they are coming 3 years later, asking us to sell them 3.5, which has been awarded till 26 to somebody else. So you see that sometimes even the big operator don't know what will be in the future. But this is the real story, and we have to fight with this, okay?
Well, necessity is the mother of invention, and they are more and more developmental, I think, even in predicting what's going on the market. And we are waiting for the WRC 2019, organized by Mario Maniewicz, so as to find out about even upper bandwidth than 20 gigahertz that are going to be released in Europe sooner or later for the 5G. But one last issue on clarification. Could you kindly clarify the schedule for this rollout? I mean, starting from 700 megahertz, C-band, as you mentioned, has already been released. And what about the 26 gigahertz?
Yeah, we are slowly cleaning up 26, but there are still some negotiation, Ministry of Military and such things. I think it's many countries like that. But basically, we think
I'm on board too.
Yeah, basically we will like to have it ready, 26 giga. Yeah, we will see what's happened in reality, but I think we are heading towards this to be prepared.
Well, Jaromir, it seems that your authority and your, let's say, movers and shakers on the governmental level has successfully sorted this case out, as you've got the special budget for such kind of issues. Needless to say that in Poland we've got ongoing discussions regarding how to organize some kind of, let's say, governmental funds, especially collected by the regulator for the previous acquisitions or other, let's say, annual payments imposed on operators, so as to release additional incentives for investments in infrastructure rollout, even just after the spectrum distribution. And as we were talking previously, you mentioned that you've got special, let's say, solution for co-founding such kind of developments organized on the governmental level. Could you kindly say a few words on that?
Yeah. Thank you, Marcin. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. Well, we have general provision in our electronic communications law that say that some percentage of spectrum annual fees are going to the fund, and we are allowed to use it for refarming or other stuff which is necessary when there is EU harmonization, a change of the usage of the band, and so on. This is good start, but it's not everything. So for 700 megahertz band, because you probably know that in Czech Republic we have a high percentage penetration of terrestrial TV. It's more than 50%. So the transition to DVB-T2 have to be very smooth and without any critical point. So we have special amendment of the law for this case, for transition to DVB-T2. And it seems that everything is it's win-win situation, but it's not, because above all these funds and above all these amendments, there is a DG competition and state aid issue. So it's very nice to have such obligation, such provision in the law, but now we are in the phase of notifications, almost 2 years, and we are looking closely for the German case, which was quite good, but it's not one-to-one per situation in Czech Republic. So we are waiting for final decision of European Commission. If everything what is planned, we can pay for.
Well, but what is a justification for, let's say, decision? I mean, and how it's organized on the, let's say, operational level. I mean, how does operators who would like to be granted with the money from your system, from your, let's say, budget, they supposedly they've got the business case and they want to be granted. How it's organized? I mean, in terms of decision-making process. Because, for example, in Poland we've got over 7,000 operators and 3,500 internet service provided. We are very smart in using EU funds for NGN rollout, but I know that we are not able to guarantee a level playing field for all players, and of course sometimes someone, let's say, has to be excluded from that. I believe that this budget is limited. So how it's organized, who is let's say, submitting this go-no-go decision for each case that is delivering to your office?
Well, in the end, it's the decision of our office, and every operator who thinks he is sued for the reason which are stated in the law. For example, I have this kind of frequencies, and the European Commission changed the usage of these frequencies, and I have to change the antennas or something like that. They can send us application for money, and we will say, okay, this is cost we can pay, this not, and in the end there is the decision. And of course, operators can go with this decision to the court if they do not agree on this. Well, frankly speaking, the law is written in good way that till DVB-T2 transition we have enough money there. For the 700 megahertz case, we have to change the mechanisms how many of fees are going to this fund to hire it for transitional period.
Okay, Cristina, I'm coming back to you with another issue. You mentioned that you fully understand this, let's say, dilemma regarding the ratio in 5G development between B2B, I mean industrial development and implementation, and B2C, so the usage from the end user perspective. Do you think that having in mind, let's say, the British telecom heritage and some know-how from the previous years, I remember when you were one of the most crucial benchmark for, let's say, releasing local loop unbundling on bitstream access. Do you still believe that the 5G rollout is only the, let's say, purely MNO case, or is there any space for other, let's say, entrepreneurs, especially dedicated to fixed market or, let's say, affiliated branches of telco market, to be granted with some, let's say, I don't know how to say it in English, but some, let's say, value added from the 5G rollout?
Yes, thanks, Martin. I certainly believe that, and the UK strongly believe that it's not only an MNO world, and we have seen some initial interest in the deployment of fixed wireless, if this is what we're talking about. So on the back of what is happening in the US, we have seen a few operators in the UK expressing an interest in using 5G technology, especially operators that have got spectrum already in their hands, and you will know that we've got H3G3 who has already got quite a lot of 5G spectrum to start launching fixed wireless. But at the same time, beyond, in this case, is still an MNO, but offering a service that it's wireless broadband proposition. By opening up the 38242, we're also trying to target the alternative ISP providers, the WISP of this world, and their ability to potentially deliver additional fixed wireless solution, either in area where MNOs are not, or in the case of 38242, where the band will be shared, where we don't have already satellite earth station or fixed links, which is in a great proportion of a UK territory. So we see alternative business models. What I want to say is also we see not only for the provision of fixed wireless solution, but also private networks. We've touched a little bit before, and I wanted to expand just a little bit more in a document that we have published recently. We really explored the different type of business model that could be deployed, that could be enabled by 5G. So we're talking a lot as well about a neutral host solution, so where somebody kits out a venue like this and then allows operator to use it. Private network within factories because they want the control, the full control of their networks, or even hybrid solutions, so MNOs, service providers, alternatives, alternative players. In the UK, we've got even the case of sort of consultants. That's Accenture could be one, that all of a sudden decide to offer a lot of solution. So it expands the role of 5G connectivity beyond what has been the role of 4G, which was mainly for a very direct B2C. And yes, we have seen in some cases the provision of fixed wireless on 4G, but we believe 5G will just give you that additional speed and capacity that you couldn't get before. But it's a sort of wait and see in a way, because we will need to see whether it delivers the quality of service requirements that we've got in the UK. We've got what we call a universal service obligation with regards to fixed broadband. So we're trying to understand whether will a wireless solution meet those obligations or not. So it's a wait and see, but we certainly see the potential for this.
It seems that there is no, let's say, easy win-win projects in that.
Pardon?
There is no, let's say, win-win projects,
yes,
easy, available in nearest future. Kostas, one issue regarding the infrastructure, because as you've mentioned in Greece, you've got quite, let's say, quite visible difference between rural and suburban areas in terms of, let's say, the capacity that needs to be delivered, and the problems are quite similar to Polish case. But we were talking just before on the backstage, we were talking about the base station licensing and the problem that you've got in Greece regarding the deployment of masts. I must say in advance that it's not only the Greek case, because in Poland it's extremely difficult, not only because of the density of base stations and, let's say, some social threats that are behind, let's say, releasing operator to deploy its infrastructure, but it's always about the bureaucracy and the time we need to spend preparing all documents, fulfilling all rules and regulations imposed by, in vast majority cases, local authorities. And could you kindly share your opinion on that? Because it is popularly believed in Poland that it's one of the biggest bottleneck in front of the infrastructure rollout.
Thank you for the question. Before responding to this one, just one comment on the fixed wireless access we discussed with Cristina. If you ask me which one is the most possibly use case for 5G in Greece, I would say fixed wireless access. Consider a country with so many islands and so many mountains, and consider a country with some other burdens not so frequently present in other countries, like archaeological sites. It's not always possible to dig, even in Athens area, to pass fiber cables. So fixed wireless access could be a very interesting alternative to fiber to the home. And this is something we want to evaluate also from an economic point of view and identify which areas are better for fiber to the home, which are for fixed wireless access from a cost perspective. Now, coming to the base stations and antenna licensing, indeed, in 5G, with millimeter wave access being possible and with large amount of users and high data rates expected, the densification of the network is going to be huge compared to previous technologies. So licensing base stations becomes a challenging task itself. We face several burdens. As you said, local authorities are not always willing to cooperate and to speed up processes. Of course, we have lack of trust among stakeholders like communities, authorities, operators. In some cases, bureaucracy takes also long. For example, if we have an appeal in case an application has been rejected, this might introduce further delays. There are also other concerns by the public. So we have several burdens. But since 2012, Greek governments, in collaboration with the Telecoms Commission, tried to, let's say, introduce a framework to overcome these base station licensing issues. We have three major objectives, and we work on them. One is to implement one-stop shop process for base station licensing based on electronic tools, online system. The second is to introduce what we call light licensing regime to speed up the licensing process for specific type of base stations. And we keep updating this one. The third one is that we decided to make all information around base stations, including radiation measurements, available to the public to achieve full transparency. So this is what we have been working on, and we try to improve all the time.
Sorry for interruption, when those informations are available on your website, do they, let's say, result in any social threats? Do you have any requests from the, let's say, social movements, groups of people who are afraid of, let's say, radiation issues?
Well, what we saw is quite something we did not expect originally. So all the information is available through our web-based platform, including EMF measurements, which are linked to the GIS system of the competent authority. So from the moment we started publishing and make public all this information and increase transparency, the number of complaints and comments of being afraid of this wireless technology started to decrease. So transparency, I believe, is a key in all this discussion around base stations, licensing, and possible issues from radiation, etc. So everything is publicly available. Anybody can check all the details of any base station, including measurements, and I think this is key.
Okay, well, in Poland we've got quite difficult situation in terms of this issue, but we've got quite good example of, let's say, co-investments regarding the passive infrastructure, especially wireless passive infrastructure, I mean masts. But I would like to address this question to João, because I know that you get some thoughts regarding the co-investments, regarding 5G deployment, and some, let's say, thoughts how it should be organized on the, let's say, regulatory level to guarantee that operators are able to make both ends meet in the same time. I mean, on the one hand, to guarantee an appropriate capex for the infrastructure rollout, in the same time to guarantee some kind of efficiency and, of course, security, especially in terms of some threats that are in front of us in all Europe. So,
thank you for your question. No doubt this is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity, mainly for the operators. In some cases, this requires some change in the mindset, because many times they used to compete concerning the development of the networks. But even so, in the past, we had already very good examples of co-investment, and I'm sure that this is absolutely required for the future, because we don't want to leave any region back. We want to improve the coverage, and so the sharing and the co-investment are keywords, and I believe that this action will take place because this development requires high investments. The investments in fiber are relatively relevant to provide the new capacity that it will be needed, and also the development of the small cells that will be also required. Everything will imply this new way of thinking, a new way of looking for the networks. And in the case of my country, we already observed this change in behavior, because the incumbent operator announced that he would like to sell to a wholesale the fiber network. And the reason, of course, it will be a way to get money from this operation, but also the explanation is that they conceive that it could be enterprises interested to manage this network and offering the network to different operators. So this means that this transformation is taking place and will accelerate in the near future. We also observed last year an agreement between the second and the third operators announcing a co-investment to ensure this development of fiber. So we really believe that this is critical. In the case of Portugal also, we'll have to replace the submarine cables connecting the mainland with our islands in Azores and in Madeira. This is also a huge investment, but is also required to provide good communications to the islands in Madeira and in Azores. And this transformation that will take place with the introduction of 5G opens new opportunities, because in the future the submarine cables, we see these not only to provide good communications, of course are critical to access internet, but also we are now investigating the use of these submarine cables for other purpose, for instance to have alerts on the case of seismic phenomenon. So there are many opportunities with 5G and with all this development. This is my conviction.
I'm keeping my finger crossed for you. Vladimír, you are combining, let's say, quite huge experience on the Slovakian telecom market as you came to, let's say, public sector from a private one, and you, my intention is to find out about your advice how to successfully combine, let's say, co-investments with the operators' expectations to, let's say, to guarantee that they will be granted with an appropriate return on assets from their investments, leaving behind, let's say, beyond the discussion, all those issues regarding the disputes on digital terrestrial television, just purely, let's say, financial and operational issue. How it looks like from your perspective.
Thank you. I think that that is something what we have to change. I think we have to change behavior on the market, because today's situation is like, for example, in Slovakia, there have been a lot of negotiation among operators about co-investment, network sharing, passive infrastructure sharing. I'm not speaking about frequency sharing, because this is rather to be a little bit difficult issue. But, you know, after 2-3 years negotiation among two biggest operators about passive infrastructure sharing to reach more optical fiber to be laid down, nothing happened till today. So it's very difficult, you know, I say, it's difficult to get a nice woman if she doesn't want you. And this behavior is among our operators. So I think this is the first attitude what should be changed. They should start cooperating and not looking each other that that competitors is the best competitors. No, it's not the way. So, and from our point of view as a regulatory authority, of course, this is what we already heard before. We have to take the steps, also change our attitude, of course, and there should not be, by, for example, selling frequencies, the price should not be the first what we are looking for. Yeah, there should be some good condition put for a tender for frequencies that they will push them to invest, to bring the money to the market. We don't need the money. Of course, the Minister of Finance will not agree with me, but not to put money to our budget, country budget, but invest them to the building the network, because this is a crucial. We are speaking about 500 billion investment on the beginning to start really working 5G. And
Okay.
Expectations are 800 billions a year.
Just one word to Jaromír, because the time is ticking. Jaromír, if you were asked, would you kindly, let's say, rephrase in one sentence what is the most important issue from the National Regulatory Authority in Czech Republic for, let's say, successful 5G rollout? What would it be?
Well, in one sentence, it's quite difficult, but I try.
Let's try in one word.
Well, I think that for 5G success story is the sold frequencies which are used. I'm not saying only by operators, but maybe with integrators, with some big industries, with SMPs, and that makes the first layer of digital economy in next future, because it's the most important and it's the most we can really prepare for industry and for government and so on as a regulator.
Yes, so to put it briefly, it seems that we've got several issues. First of all is spectrum distribution. Second is the, let's say, incentives for the investment in terms of passive infrastructure rollout. And of course, the development of the services that would guarantee the operators an appropriate return on assets. So let's summarize that in this way, and I would like to thank you for the participation in this panel, and I hope that you will stay with us for the next sessions and for the evening event that is going to take place this evening. So thank you very much for your participations, and see you next time.